This was the rise of mass media and with it, the weaponization of deception. The news transformed into a visual spectacle controlled by unseen hands. The more one investigated, the more the lines between objective reporting and calculated manipulation seemed to blur. The seeds of doubt had been sown. At the forefront stood the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds. Their financial prowess was legendary, their influence whispered to extend globally. Historian, these families understood the power of perception, shaping thoughts and beliefs. Corporations poured money into advertising, subtly shaping narratives. Economist journalists found themselves caught in the crosshairs, with investigative reporting often buried. Public opinion became increasingly malleable, shaped by curated narratives. Whispers followed them like shadows, stories of their involvement in controversial activities. Historian, whether these whispers held any truth or not, the Bush family saga illustrated a larger point. Power perpetuates itself. The media often glossed over the unsavory aspects of these powerful families. This alleged cabal of elites operated behind the scenes, manipulating global events. Their goals were nothing short of world domination. Whistleblower, was the Committee of 300 real, or merely a figment of paranoid imaginations? This consolidation had a chilling effect on Dissent. Investigative journalists often found their careers sidelined or their stories buried. The line between information and entertainment blurred, making it difficult for viewers to discern fact from fiction. The story of the opium trade offered a chilling example of powerful interests driven by greed. Historian, this illicit trade left a trail of addiction and devastation. The opium trade found new life in the 20th century, fueled by organized crime. Heroin flooded American streets, destroying countless lives. Afghanistan became a focal point in the global fight against terrorism. Journalists the CIA poured money and resources into supporting the Mujahideen. Among those who received CIA training was Osama bin Laden. The opium trade continued to flourish, providing revenue for terrorist organizations. The war on terror revealed itself to be driven by geopolitical interests. Economists the U.S. sought to secure its access to Middle Eastern oil fields. The opium trade continued to thrive, despite eradication efforts. The war on terror inadvertently created a perfect storm for the opium trade to flourish. The capture of Saddam Hussein, beamed across the globe, was hailed as a victory for freedom and democracy. Beneath the triumphant narrative lay a deeper symbolism, a message encoded in the imagery. Historian, the fall of Saddam, the modern-day Nebuchadnezzar, resonated with biblical prophecy, hinting at a larger agenda. The toppling of his statue in Baghdad's Firdos Square mirrored the biblical account of the destruction of idols in Babylon. Historian, the Old World Order, represented by Saddam, was crumbling. Whether this new world order would usher in peace and justice or perpetuate violence remained to be seen. In the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks, a wave of patriotism washed over America. The nation, united in grief and outrage, demanded justice and protection. The Bush administration seized on this trauma to build support for the war on terror. Journalists, the media played a key role in this campaign. News channels echoed the administration's narrative of an existential threat. Images of burning buildings and grieving families fueled fear and anxiety. The language used evoked emotional responses and stifled dissent. Journalists, the war on terror implied a struggle against an abstract enemy. Critics were branded as unpatriotic, their voices drowned out. This propaganda campaign was highly effective, shaping public opinion. As the war on terror raged on, a growing number of people began to question the official narratives surrounding key events. The 9/11 attacks themselves, shrouded in controversy and unanswered questions, fueled suspicions that the Bush administration may have had prior knowledge of the attacks, or even allowed them to happen to justify their pre-existing agenda of military intervention in the Middle East. Whistleblower: the capture of Saddam Hussein, presented as a defining moment in the Iraq War, also raised eyebrows. The image of Saddam being pulled from a spider hole, disheveled and disoriented, seemed too perfect, too staged, to be entirely believable. Rumors circulated that the capture had been orchestrated for maximum media impact, a carefully crafted piece of political theater designed to bolster support for the war and demonize the Iraqi leader. These suspicions extended beyond specific events to encompass a broader sense that reality itself was being manipulated. The lines between news and entertainment, fact and fiction, became increasingly blurred. The media, complicit in this manipulation, presented a sanitized and often misleading view of the world, one that served the interests of those in power while keeping the public in the dark. Whistleblower: the rise of the internet and social media, while offering new avenues for information sharing and dissent, also created fertile ground for the spread of disinformation and propaganda. The ability to anonymously create and disseminate content made it difficult to discern truth from falsehood, fact from carefully crafted narratives designed to manipulate public opinion. This reinterpretation of the peace sign stemmed from its alleged origins in ancient pagan symbolism. Some claimed that the symbol, far from representing peace, was actually an ancient rune associated with death and destruction. Others pointed to its use by Nazi Germany, where it was incorporated into the insignia of certain SS units, further fueling suspicions about its true meaning. Historian: whether or not these claims about the peace sign's origins were true, they highlighted a broader truth about the power of symbols. Symbols are inherently ambiguous, open to interpretation and manipulation. What one person sees as a symbol of peace, another may see as a symbol of something far more sinister. This ambiguity is often exploited by those in power to advance their own agendas. Symbols like the peace sign, imbued with positive connotations, can be co-opted and used to mask more nefarious intentions. The war on terror itself, framed as a fight for freedom and democracy, could be seen as an example of this manipulation, a campaign of violence and destruction waged under the banner of peace and liberation. At the heart of this war on consciousness lay the pharmaceutical industry, a powerful force with deep pockets and a vested interest in keeping Americans hooked on a steady stream of prescription drugs. Antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, and ADHD drugs, often prescribed for vague or subjective conditions, became increasingly commonplace, creating a nation of chemically numbed citizens struggling to cope with the anxieties of modern life. Economist: the entertainment industry played its part as well, churning out a steady stream of reality shows, celebrity gossip, and mindless sitcoms designed to distract and entertain rather than challenge or inform. The 24-hour news cycle, with its constant barrage of sensationalized stories and manufactured controversies, further contributed to a climate of information overload and intellectual apathy. This assault on critical thinking served the interests of those in power by creating a population that was easily manipulated and controlled. A citizenry addicted to drugs, distracted by entertainment, and overwhelmed by information was less likely to question authority, challenge the status quo, or hold their leaders accountable. The Patriot Act, passed by Congress in the wake of the attacks, granted the government broad new powers to monitor phone calls, emails, and internet activity, all in the name of national security. The NSA, once a shadowy intelligence agency operating in the shadows, became a household name, its vast surveillance capabilities exposed by whistleblowers like Edward Snowden. Whistleblower: this expansion of surveillance went far beyond traditional wiretapping and intelligence gathering. The government began collecting vast amounts of data on its own citizens, tracking their movements, monitoring their social media activity, and building detailed profiles on their habits and beliefs. This data, often collected without warrants or probable cause, could be used to target individuals for surveillance, harassment, or even arrest. The rise of the surveillance state, justified as a necessary evil to combat terrorism, had a chilling effect on free speech and dissent. The knowledge that their every move was being monitored made people less likely to express unpopular opinions, criticize the government, or engage in activities that might attract unwanted attention from authorities. The line between national security and totalitarian control, once clear and distinct, became increasingly blurred. The War on Terror, with its amorphous enemy and open-ended objectives, provided a convenient pretext for dismantling civil liberties and expanding government control in the name of national security. The price of safety, it seemed, was freedom itself. Activist, the Patriot Act, passed in the heat of the moment with little debate or dissent, became a blueprint for a new era of government overreach. The Act, with its sweeping surveillance powers and erosion of due process rights, effectively turned the Constitution on its head, transforming a document designed to protect individual liberties into a tool for state control. Activist, the erosion of freedom wasn't limited to the halls of government. A climate of fear and suspicion seeped into everyday life. People were encouraged to report their neighbors for suspicious activity, to view dissent as unpatriotic, and to trust that the government, even when operating in secrecy, had their best interests at heart. Activist. This culture of fear, carefully cultivated by those in power, made it easier to justify increasingly authoritarian measures, all in the name of keeping America safe. The consequences of this erosion of freedom were profound. It created a society where dissent was stifled, where critical thinking was discouraged, and where the very principles of democracy were undermined. Activist, the America of the Founding Fathers, a nation born from a spirit of rebellion against tyranny, seemed to be fading into a distant memory, replaced by a society where security, no matter the cost, reigned supreme. This tactic, as old as warfare itself, found new life in the 21st century, fueled by a sophisticated propaganda machine and a public condition to respond with fear rather than reason. Journalists, the enemies in the War on Terror, were often shadowy and ill-defined, their motives a mix of religious fanaticism and a thirst for power. They were portrayed as irrational actors, driven by a hatred of freedom and a desire to destroy Western civilization. This portrayal, while effective in demonizing the enemy and rallying public support for military action, ignored the complex historical and geopolitical factors that often contributed to terrorism. Journalists, the media complicit in this manipulation, dutifully echoed the government's narrative, rarely questioning the official line or providing context that might challenge the prevailing narrative of good versus evil. Images of terrorist attacks, real or staged, filled television screens, reinforcing the message that the threat was real, imminent, and required a forceful response. Journalist, this cycle of fear and reaction served the interests of those who profited from war and the expansion of state power. Defense contractors reaped billions in profits, intelligence agencies saw their budgets swell, and politicians used the specter of terrorism to consolidate their power and silence dissent. Journalists, the War on Terror, it seemed, was a self-perpetuating machine, fueled by fear and designed to maintain a permanent state of emergency. The ancient Roman tactic of using entertainment and spectacle to divert attention from political realities found new life in the 21st century, albeit in a more sophisticated and insidious form. Economists, the rise of reality television, with its manufactured dramas and focus on the superficial, provided a potent form of escapism. Celebrity gossip, relentlessly promoted by a media obsessed with the trivial, offered a further distraction, diverting attention away from the weightier issues of the day. Economist social media, with its endless stream of updates, notifications, and carefully curated personas, created an illusion of connection while fostering a sense of isolation and disengagement from the real world. This culture of distraction served the interests of those in power by creating a citizenry that was apathetic, disengaged, and easily manipulated. Economist, a population obsessed with the latest celebrity scandal or reality TV drama, was less likely to pay attention to the erosion of their civil liberties, the corruption of their government, or the growing inequality that plagued their society. The bread in this modern-day Colosseum came in the form of consumerism. Economist people were encouraged to find meaning and fulfillment in material possessions, to work longer hours to afford the latest gadgets and fashions, and to measure their worth by their purchasing power. This cycle of consumption, fueled by debt and driven by a relentless advertising machine, kept the masses tethered to a system that benefited the few at the expense of the many. The internet, once hailed as a tool for democratizing information, also became a breeding ground for alternative narratives and dissenting voices. Independent journalists, bloggers, and activists, operating outside the constraints of mainstream media, began to challenge the official narratives, exposing corruption, questioning the motives of those in power, and connecting the dots between seemingly disparate events. This search for truth wasn't always easy or straightforward. Activists. The information landscape, flooded with disinformation, propaganda, and carefully crafted narratives designed to mislead and confuse, made it difficult to separate fact from fiction. But the very act of questioning, of refusing to accept the official line without scrutiny, became a form of rebellion against a system that sought to control perception and stifle dissent. The awakening wasn't limited to a select few. Across the globe, people began to see through the illusions that had long held them captive. The Occupy Wall Street movement, the Arab Spring uprisings, and the growing wave of populist anger in both developed and developing countries all pointed to a growing awareness that the system was rigged, that those in power were not serving the interests of the people, and that a different world was possible. The first step in this fight is awareness. We must educate ourselves about the forces that shape our world, the systems of power that control the flow of information, and the tactics used to manipulate our thoughts and beliefs. We must learn to think critically, to question everything, and to seek out alternative sources of information. Activist. The second step is action. We must refuse to be passive consumers of information and instead become active participants in shaping the narratives that define our world. We must support independent media, amplify dissenting voices, and use our own platforms to challenge injustice and promote truth. This fight won't be easy. Those in power will not relinquish their control willingly. They will continue to use their wealth, their influence, and their control over the media to maintain the status quo. But the tide is turning. The more people wake up to the reality of our situation, the more we connect with each other and realize our collective power, the harder it will be for those in power to maintain their grip on our minds and our future. The fight for a just and equitable future is a fight for our very humanity. It is a fight to reclaim our narrative, to break free from the matrix of control, and to create a world where truth, justice, and human dignity are not just lofty ideals but lived realities. The evidence is overwhelming, the patterns undeniable. We live in a carefully constructed illusion manipulated by those in power. This is about truth, freedom, and self-determination. For too long, we have been passive observers. We've accepted curated narratives, failing to question motives, divided by manufactured controversies, blind to the common enemy. But the time for complacency is over. The stakes are too high, the consequences too dire. We are at a crossroads in history. Choose to awaken to the truth and reclaim our power. The power to change our course rests in our hands. We are not powerless. Recognizing the problem is the first step towards liberation. Unity is key to reclaiming our power. Millions are awakening, rejecting fear and division. Connect, build bridges, and forge a collective force for change. This is a call to awaken human consciousness, reclaim our voices, speak truth to power, engage in peaceful resistance, support independent media. Change begins with each of us. It starts with our daily choices. Become conscious consumers of information. This fight requires courage and determination. The rewards are immeasurable. Create a world shaped by love, compassion, and justice.